Welcome to the weekly YouTube Apologetics live podcast and YouTube show. I'm Bobby Conway, the 1 Minute Apologist, and I am so excited to have Dr. William Lane Craig as my guest this week on the program. Dr. Craig, good to see you.
Good to see you again, Bobby. Thank you for having me on the program.
Well, thank you for willing to come on. I'm so excited because of the topic today, especially, a lot of times people get to listen to you talk about quarks and the quantum field and whether or not, numbers and circles and shapes exist. But I thought, wow, what it would be like to just give some of the people who are interested in apologetics the opportunity to listen to, in my opinion, is the greatest Christian apologist of our time. And Dr. Craig, I will say at the front, I've read a lot, I've studied a lot, I've been under a lot of teachers. I have learned more from you in my life than any other human being on the face of the earth. And I just want to say thank you for your life and your commitment.
Praise the Lord. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's been great. And I know so many other Christian apologists would say the same thing. Here's the goal today. If you're listening, I want you to, if you've never heard of, which I'm sure you have, Dr. William Lane Craig, I want you to know this great man. And if you have listened to many of his episodes before, I thought you would appreciate as much as I would appreciate to hear his heart on what it means to be a Christian apologist in a time like this. I thought it would be good, Dr. Craig, maybe just to tell us at the beginning how you got into apologetics yourself.
Part of it has to do with the fact, Bobby, that I come out of a non-Christian family. I had a good and loving home, but it wasn't a religious home, not even a church-going family. But when I was a teenager, I became a Christian my junior year in high school. And immediately I was confronted with having to explain to all of my non-Christian friends and my family as to why I had taken this radical step. So right from the beginning, I was involved in giving reasons for belief. And that interest then was deepened when I graduated from high school and went to Wheaton College. The genius of Wheaton as a Christian institution is the integration of faith and learning. I was taught how to develop a Christian worldview, a Christian perspective on the sciences, on the arts, on history, literature, and so forth. And it was at Wheaton that this vision came of presenting the gospel in the context of giving an intellectual defense of the Christian worldview.
And as you started to grow as an apologist, I know that there was a lack of supply of apologetic material at the time. And you fast forward to your time right now and where we live, it's amazing the burgeoning experience of books and the plethora of different pieces and websites and ministries that are out there. How has apologetics changed since you got into it until today?
Well, as you say, there has just been a renaissance in terms of publishing in apologetics, in terms of the number of popular level apologists who have ministries of this sort. And then I have to say as well, in a profound renaissance of Christian scholarship in philosophy especially, but also in New Testament studies and in the sciences. And this renaissance in the academy among Christian academics has been the lifeblood of the popular movement of apologetics among lay people. It has fed and fueled this movement that you are part of.
What are some of the books that have influenced you the most in shaping you as an apologist, Dr. Craig?
Well, initially, it was reading Edward John Carnell's book, An Introduction to Christian Apologetics, published in 1948. I had never read a book like this in my life. And Carnell was interacting with questions like, what is truth? How do we test for truth? How do we show that Christianity is true? And I was just seized by the kinds of questions and answers that Carnell was giving. So he was my entry point. And then I guess I would say after that would be Stuart Hackett and his book, The Resurrection of Theism, which introduced me to the Kalam cosmological argument that has been my sort of signature argument in natural theology since I did my doctoral studies on it during the 1970s. And then I think as a philosopher, as I've grown academically, the work of Alvin Plantinga has tremendously influential. I look to Plantinga as my beacon, so to speak, for guiding me in doing excellent Christian philosophy.
You know, Dr. Craig, when I think about the apologetic task at hand today and wondering where somebody begins, what would you say? I mean, there's people out there, they're living in this context. We live in a crazy time, no doubt, and they want to get into Christian apologetics. How would you guide them? How would you steer them?
Well, I think, first of all, Bobby, that everyone needs to have a foundation in logic, no matter what discipline you go into. So I would really encourage people to take a course or read a textbook in basic sentential logic. There are only about 9 rules of logic that govern all of rational thinking. And if you can master these rules, they will help you positively to construct logically valid arguments for your conclusions, as well as to spot logical mistakes in the objections of your opponents. So whichever area you go into, the study of logic is very helpful. I also think that getting a grounding in philosophy is very valuable. Even if you go into, say, biblical studies or scientific apologetics, you will be much, much better equipped if you have a basic grounding in philosophy, because what philosophy does for you will give you the tools for conceptual analysis and analysis of arguments and careful definition and formulation of points of view. And so that will be very helpful, I think, to anybody. And then I guess finally, I would say that you need to think at some point about what area of apologetics you really want to specialize in. Do you want to do historical apologetics for the reliability of the New Testament, say, or the historical Jesus? Or would you rather do philosophical apologetics, or perhaps scientific apologetics, working the interface between science and Christianity? All of these are different areas of specialization. And I think it's good for each of us to have a general knowledge of apologetics, but then to have an area of specialization too, where we go deeper.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on all 3 of those practical points that you listed. In particular, I was talking with my son today and telling him about the Defenders class that you teach and how I have appreciated that. I mean, I've sat through a master's of theology and lots of different theological professors, but I feel like your philosophical insight in the way that you come with that perspective, you have been greatly protected from mistakes that I've seen other theologians make because they don't have that philosophical background. And so I have really got a lot out of that. I mean, I think the Defenders class, if people haven't got a chance to go through the Defenders podcast, I mean, that's going to be a seminary education in and of itself. It's just fantastic.
Having taught seminary myself, Bobby, I can almost guarantee you that you will get a better education in systematic theology if you will work through that series of Defenders lectures than you would at any seminary in the United States.
Yeah, I would concur. And how much time did you spend, Dr. Craig, with logic? Because one of the things that I think all of us who watch you in debate is it's just rapier, clarity. Your thinking is just crisp. You cut things apart. So when people are sharing, it's almost like you can just catch inconsistency so quickly. Were you always that way? I mean, just gifted with discernment, or was that logic that kind of has made you like that?
It's definitely an acquired ability, Bob. And I thank you for the compliment. The young Christian philosopher I so admired a man like George Mavrodes, the late Christian philosopher from the University of Michigan. Mavrodes had a mind like a steel trap, and he would spot a fallacy or make a conceptual distinction that would just be brilliant. And I thought, oh, if someday I could only learn to be that skilled as Professor Mavrodes was. And so it comes just from practice. You know, you can take a basic course in logic and then maybe follow it up by reading some books, for example, on modal logic, the logic of possibility and necessity, or counterfactual logic, which is very important when it comes to topics like middle knowledge, which deals in counterfactuals. But then it just comes through practice, reading the work of others, like Alvin Plantinga, and seeing how they dissect an argument logically, how they analyze it, and then just trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing up logic and philosophy as kind of an entry point into apologetics. For me, I wish I would have had that advice early on. I ended up in a massive crisis of faith. And I think it was because I didn't have the philosophical and the logical tools to help me navigate some of my doubts. So I was studying lots of apologetics. I have my theology. And so the danger was I didn't have the handmaiden. I didn't have philosophy to come alongside and help me. And as I would grow in those skills, it really helped me even with some of the doubts that had me at times, if I'm being honest, wanting to hang from a rope. I mean, you give your life fully to Christ, you fall in love with the Lord, and then all of a sudden you're questioning this whole thing. That can create some real existential angst.
Oh, yes, it can. I recently did this study on the historical Adam. And as people who have been following my work know, this was very anguishing for me to work through this material and try to understand the historicity of Adam and how one understands properly these early chapters of Genesis. And so I can identify with what you say. And I do think that philosophy is a great aid in avoiding conceptual traps, and sometimes, as Wittgenstein put it, seeing how to get the fly out of the fly bottle. You can see ways of escape that perhaps wouldn't be as evident to the unskilled person.
Let's talk a little bit about the apologetic issues of our time. I mean, in your opinion, the issues change, right? I mean, we go from decade to decade. Some of the massive questions like the problem of evil, the resurrection, the existence of God, what is truth, they seem to stick there. But then sometimes there are these other issues, especially in the moral arena as it relates to some of the evolving that takes place. What do you see as some of the biggest apologetic tasks that we need to be ready to defend for a culture such as this?
Well, let me say, Bobby, that I think we must never relax our grip on these traditional arguments for the existence of God and for the historicity of Jesus and his resurrection. Don't ever think that these are old hat or don't need to be redefended, because these are so foundational that if we lose the existence of God, we will lose everything in a secular culture. So I want to encourage apologists to master those fundamental arguments before taking on things that might be more fashionable and au courant in our current culture. But you're certainly right in saying that in our current culture, issues of sexual ethics, for example, particularly the homosexual lifestyle, are going to be front and center in terms of the reason that many people reject what Christianity teaches. Other areas that I think will be very important in coming years will be what one might call theological neurology. That is to say, brain studies and the implications of neurology for theology. This is really a developing frontier that needs Christians working there. Probably artificial intelligence as well would be pulled into that same orbit. The threat of religious pluralism has been a burning theological issue of our day. The idea that Christ alone can be the way of salvation is deeply offensive to many people. And so a defense of Christian particularism that Christ alone is a way of salvation is very vital, I think, in our day of religious relativism.
Yeah, I love how you emphasize making sure that we continue to defend the historicity of the resurrection of Christ and utilize these arguments for God's existence. Because I would say that it is true. And I love how God led your path, Dr. Craig. I mean, the fact that you got your PhD and your doctoral work and the existence of God, the Kalam, and the resurrection, I think what that did is those really are the two main issues. And so it's just great because I know when I was doubting and struggling, all these ancillary issues that I could, trouble myself with, at the end of the day, if God created us and if Jesus rose from the dead, that really solved a lot of the angst that I felt in these other arenas.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. My friend Michael Lacona is a natural doubter. And he said that he would be struggling with some issue that was causing him difficulties. And he says his friend Gary Habermas would say to him, "But Mike, did Jesus of Nazareth rise from the dead or not?" And Mike would say, "Yeah, I think that he did." And Gary would say, "Well, then, what's the problem?" Mike would say, "But the problem here that I'm struggling with." And Gary would say, "But Mike, did Jesus rise from the dead?" And Mike said, once he really understood that, then, as you say, it enables you to live with unanswered questions and difficulties that may be annoying, but you can get along with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if Jesus did die, then he really did live, and if he really did live, he really was born, and you can just roll. If he rose from the grave, he really was buried. And if he really was buried, he really did die. You can just roll that back, and I'm so thankful for just the research that's been put out by you and Gary Habermas and Lacona on the resurrection. Let's talk about the church for a moment. I mean, what kind of advice, Dr. Craig, would you give to pastors? I mean, my concern, I served as a pastor for many years, and I would find that when I'm hanging out with other pastors, at times when I hung out with apologists and philosophers, I felt like, well, the pastor and me didn't always connect. At times when I hung out with pastors, I felt like the apologists and me didn't connect because I felt like I'd want to see apologists and pastors be a little bit more pastoral. And then I would see pastors wanting to see them be a little bit more philosophical and apologetic. And so I fear at times these two worlds are drifting apart where I want pastors to wake up to their need for apologetics. And it saddens me because I think that it's now just been turned over to the world of academy. And that's great. I'm so thankful for the renaissance we've seen there. But I also fear that the pastor has become more dumb in the pulpit, to be honest. What can we do to see more growth there? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying I think people graduate from seminary sometimes and they study a pop culture diet and they're not informed on how to really lead their people through these tough issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bobby. In one sense, it's not the poor pastor's fault. It's the seminary's fault. He's been inadequately trained for this task. And so now that he's in the pulpit and in the ministry, the demands upon his time are so great, he doesn't have time to go back and study philosophical arguments for God's existence. I mean, he's dealing with families facing divorce or rebellious teenagers or a church budget that's collapsing. I mean, the poor contemporary pastor has already got too much on his plate. So what I try to do to encourage pastors is to say, don't try to do this yourself. What you need to do is identify and empower a gifted layman in your church and enable him to run this kind of a ministry for you. Give him your support. Give him financial backing. Send him to apologetics conferences. Enroll him in an apologetics MA program somewhere. And really empower this layperson to spearhead this ministry in the church. And then I would encourage the pastor, insofar as he is able, to try to pepper his sermons with illustrations from contemporary culture that would try to engage with what's going on in our culture, or that would shed light on the biblical text, and make it come alive for people. Just to give a very brief illustration. Some time ago, our pastor was preaching on the disciples being on the Sea of Galilee, their fishing boat. And what he did was he showed PowerPoint slides of a first century Galilean fishing boat that was excavated for the mud of the Sea of Galilee several years ago, that enabled us to see what this kind of boat really looked like and to imagine it in our minds. And it made the Bible story come alive as an event of history and not some sort of a fairy tale that occurred in a place far, far away long, long ago. So insofar as the pastor can do that, I think that will help to bring some apologetic content to his sermons.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a gracious response. And I think that those are wonderful tips. I think my concern could be sometimes that in interacting with other pastors, they can sometimes minimize the apologetic task. Yeah. And so you can even bring things up like, well, don't we need to defend the resurrection or the trustworthiness of Scripture? Wouldn't it be helpful? Because my fear is, I say it like this: when a church is saying apologetics isn't important, I mean, it's almost equivalent to sending kids off to war with M16s and never sending them through boot camp. So they're going to go out there with their M16s and they're going to be getting shot at, and they're not going to feel equipped. And I fear sometimes what they're hearing from the pulpit is, we need to love, we need to love, we need to love. And I'm all for it. We need to love God. We need to love people. But if we go out without being equipped with some of the bullets that we need to be able to release as it relates to good argumentation, people, I fear, are going to go into the closet and not evangelize and be scared to do it. So how do we help pastors to see that apologetics is important? Maybe that's the better question.
Yeah. Well, I think the most convincing argument for the importance and value of apologetics for both laymen and pastors is that if we don't do it, we're going to lose the youth in the next generation. You want your son or daughter to commit apostasy and walk away from the Lord, then don't give him any good reasons to believe and don't answer his questions. And I think Christian parents today are very alert to this danger. They've seen so many kids walk away from the faith in college, and it breaks their hearts. And so if we can convince pastors that he's got to do something for the sake of the next generation, that might motivate him to see the importance of this.
Yeah, I think that's a astute point right there. I mean, let's talk about this emerging generation, Dr. Craig. I mean, I think about BLM like how different the world looks just in COVID with BLM, and perhaps some talk about an emerging communism. We've got anarchy. We've got LGBTQ. We are pretty confused as a culture right now. And when I think about even inside the church, I wonder, like, when the doors finally open in church, people are going to want to know, well, what just happened? And are pastors aware of how many of their congregants have been influenced by BLM, LGBTQ? Are they able to talk about these issues? Is it hard for you to picture a future of orthodoxy in our country in light of some of the emerging issues?
Well, gosh, Bobby, I hate to be a pessimist. I mean, I think there are good answers. And I know people who are giving good critiques of these neo-Marxist movements. And so if we can just help people to be aware of these, I think we can insulate them to the effect of these. That's what I try to do in my Defenders class. This is my small effort as a Christian Sunday school teacher to try to teach about these things every Sunday. And for lay who are interested, at least getting some ammunition, such as you say is necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I love your passion there to not want to be a pessimist. I think I'm a natural optimist, but I fear I'm becoming more pessimistic as I get older. At the same token, I don't want that to happen to me. And I think that it's important that people hear the message that you just shared, because I fear that if the youth, if all they hear from us who, are older is, boy, I'd hate to be you, or it looks really hopeless.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm almost out of here. It doesn't give them a lot of hope. And so the way that you answer that is, I think that the narrative should be one of, the times are tough. It's difficult. We've got a lot to think about, but what an opportunity that we have. And what kind of opportunities can you see for the emerging generation as it relates to apologetics and evangelism in this culture?
Well, as you know, there are more and more conferences that are being held in apologetics where lay people can get trained. And I think that's terrific. Also, if youth pastors can take their kids through a book like The Case for Christ or On Guard, this is going to help to equip middle and high schoolers to be more effective witnesses for Christ. So there are certainly the resources. I mean, if we were bereft of resources, Bobby, like the church was in, say, the 1950s or 60s, then maybe I'd be more pessimistic. But as you said at the beginning of this podcast, we are awash in good resources and ministries if we will simply avail ourselves of them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that as we get our, I'd love to see pastors even being aware of just some of the different tools that are out there. We did the On Guard DVD series with you with your On Guard book several years ago. And it was fun, though, because I was like, Dr. Craig wants to use On Guard. This is kind of like where he puts the cookies down on the shelf. Now, Dr. Craig, there's a rumor going around that you think you're putting the cookies down on everyday person's shelf, but the cookies really aren't down there quite.
Yeah, I've had a number of people say to me, why did you have to put the Leibnizian argument from contingency first?
But we love you for it, and we're so thankful. It's like, again, as Sam Harris said, William Lane Craig is the one apologist that puts the fear of God in us atheists. And anytime somebody could potentially listen to you, Dr. Craig, and think, he's just flying way too high, I will always be right there to say, yes, but if we didn't have him doing what he was doing, we wouldn't have people like Sam Harris saying he puts the fear of God in atheists. And so I'm so thankful that we have somebody who so values and doesn't minimize the importance of preparation and discipline and study.
Well, and there are lots of us. I mean, there are so
Absolutely.
many wonderful, brilliant Christian philosophers today and New Testament scholars. I'm just really encouraged to be alive at this time in history, rather than, say, back in the 1930s and 40s, Bobby, in the heyday of positivism and verificationism. Those were the really dark days, not now.
Yeah, because it has gained some respect with the Renaissance, and people are. There's a lot of Christians that have got philosophical positions in secular universities today, and that's encouraging.
Yes, and I think we're going to have more and more as time goes on.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Craig, talk to us a little bit about your study habits. I mean, you strike me as a very disciplined person. I don't know how you could produce what you produce without discipline. Maybe talk to us about the importance of discipline in becoming an apologist, and maybe how you have just created some borders to make sure you can keep committed to your work.
Yeah. I am extremely disciplined. And the reason for that is because I'm not naturally very smart. In high school, I had to study 4 hours every night in order to get through. From 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock every night, I was doing homework. I have never worked academically as hard on anything as I did in high school. My college was easier than high school. Graduate school was easier than college. Getting a doctorate was the easiest of all. Why? Because I had laid the foundation early for those good study habits. And so as my time increased, it just got easier and easier. So it really is true that discipline can make up for a lack of natural talent. I have noticed in seminary and beyond that there are many other of my classmates who were far more brilliant, far more gifted naturally than I was. But what I had that some of them didn't have was a tremendous work ethic. And I believe that you can more than make up through hard work what you lack in natural talent.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you right there completely. You know, Dr. Craig, when I was in high school, I wanted to go to the Marine Corps. You needed a 31 on the ASVAB, and I failed it. I was a big partier, into drugs, alcohol, promiscuity, never heard the gospel. I was 19. So I said, well, let me wait a month and take the ASVAB again. I failed it. I waited 6 months. I failed it again. The third time I got a 27 on the ASVAB, okay? I was out in the parking lot smoking things while my kids were studying. And you needed a 28 to become an infantryman in the United States Army. I got a 27. And so when you say that, I didn't know how to type. I didn't know what an adjective was. And so I went off the Bible. I got into reading because I fell in love with God, and I felt like reading was the way I could know the God who redeemed me. So I started studying and growing and go to Bible college and did decent. Seminary did really well. And my D-Min, you know, summa cum laude, and then about to finish up my PhD defending my Viva in a few months from now.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, where are you doing your PhD? Where's that?
I did it at University of Birmingham, where you did. Yeah, I'm studying under.
Goodness, that's fantastic.
Alan Cheatham.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Yeah. Well, congratulations. That's a real testimonial.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the funny thing is I always perceived myself as just a guy that really blew it and could never have any academic hope. And, you know, I fell in love with learning. And, you know, when I fell in love with God, that became the key. I wanted to know him. How much do you think that played a part in just, you become a Christian, and now it's like, wow, I want to know who God really is. Would your love for that help
that
you
wasn't that wasn't a factor in my personal story, because as a non-believer, I was already heavily into academics because I had no athletic ability. And therefore, in academics, I could succeed and have some measure of self-respect and a sense of accomplishment. But I have seen personally in the lives of others the phenomenon that you described. I remember at Northern Illinois University, when Jan and I were working there were students like Chuck Renner, who, as a non-believer, was always stoned and out of it. He was flunking out, and he came to Christ. His life was turned upside down, and he became an A student because he was intellectually revolutionized. There's something vastly improving to the mind about becoming a Christian. Because, as you say, it puts you in love with truth and with learning, and it just makes you a better person. Absolutely.
Yeah, Dr. Craig, so in our remaining time, let me ask you just some rapid fire questions. I remember when I had you on the Woman Apologist, and it was so much fun because I was asking you all these different arguments, and just, you know, you just verbatim were spitting these things out. And it's almost like I felt like you were getting an adrenaline rush. I'd throw you one and I'd throw you another one. I'd throw you another one. Like, this guy just loves being in a hot seat. You're just so, gifted with this. But let me just, for our audience, I'd love just to get a bunch of questions out of you, like things like, what are you currently working on right now?
I am working on a systematic philosophical theology. This will be a summation of my whole life's work that will do an analysis of the whole body of systematic theology from a philosophical point of view. And so just the day before talking to you, I've been writing my chapter on the doctrine of Scripture and trying to lay out a biblically adequate and philosophically coherent doctrine of the inspiration and authority of Scripture.
Yeah, I can't wait for that to come out. This is a project I've heard you say is going to take about 5 to 10 years.
Yes.
Well, Lord, keep you healthy and living a long time.
Thank you.
Favorite and worst debate. Can you think of that offhand? You've had many, or one of your favorites, and one time you go, I just walked away not feeling good about that?
One of my favorite debates was at the Cambridge Debating Society at the University of Cambridge in England. This is the oldest debating society in the world. And it was in the form of an auditorium that was like the benches of Parliament, where the benches face each other and you're down in the well. And as you speak, you walk back and forth in the well, addressing the people in the benches on both sides. And around the room, there was a gallery with people looking down, and you could talk to them. And then in British style debating, anybody in the audience could suddenly stand up and interrupt you and raise a point of order. And you had to call upon him and answer it. The moderator for the debate, the head of the debating society, was dressed in Scottish regalia, a kilt and everything. And after the debate was over, the way the students voted were there were two doors, aye and nay, and you would exit through the door, indicating your vote to who won the debate, and these would be tabulated. And then after the debate upstairs in the student bar, a girl would come into the room ringing a brass bell and announcing the results of the debate, and announce that we had won the debate on is Christianity or belief in God a delusion. So that was really amazing. Very memorable. Probably one of the worst was a debate I had at the University of Leeds in England with a philosopher who would not engage my arguments intellectually, but instead all he did was mock. And he had this sort of British dry wit, if you know what I mean, that could just mock and use satire and get the audience laughing and so forth. And I knew I couldn't match him in his British wit. So I didn't even try. I would just try to treat the arguments at face value, try to answer them, put forward my arguments, so that it was no contest in one sense intellectually, but he certainly won the audience through his wit and his satire, and that left a very bitter taste in my mouth.
Yeah, when somebody in a debating situation is kind of just throwing red meat to the audience, can you say something like, if like in a way around kind of like stooping to their level? Can you say something like, I could stoop down to this level here and talk about A, B, C, D, E. And so that's when you're doing the whole thing anyway. So you're letting them know you're aware of it. But I want to stay on track here. How do you get yourself, because you are.
I don't know, Bobby. I've just never taken that approach. When I was in Australia, I was in a debate like this with Lawrence Krauss, where he attacked me in the most personal, vitriolic terms. And while he was doing this and accusing me of being a misogynist and things of that sort, Krauss was under investigation at the University of Arizona for sexual misconduct and was actually then banned by the university from campus, and his award from the American Human Association for Humanist of the Year was taken away from him. He was ostracized, and he was doing this at the same time that he was making these personal attacks upon me. But I just didn't feel it was appropriate for me to stoop to that level, so I just didn't do it. And my hope was, I knew it was being videotaped. I knew it was being videotaped. And so I thought, this videotape is going to live for generations. It's going to be seen by hundreds of thousands of people. And so I want to acquit myself well, to handle the arguments well. And in time, people will see who had the better arguments and who was intellectually empty. And so for that reason, I didn't even try your suggested strategy.
Well, I think that we all appreciate you modeling, defending the faith with gentleness. I think it's important, because as Christians, we are kind of, if you don't have a Christian worldview and you're up there, there's really there's really nothing to worry about as far as rules. But when you're Christians,
Yeah.
we have the Bible tells us how we're to be. We're to be gentle. We're to be, our words to be
Yeah.
seasoned with salt. So we have to model that character, and you definitely demonstrate that.
Yeah, I had to remind myself, what he's doing as a non-Christian is perfectly consistent with his worldview. You can't
Absolutely.
expect him to behave in a way that would be ethical from a Christian point of view. He doesn't believe in those things.
But there's probably moments that, if you're being honest, Dr. Craig, you get in the car with Jan afterwards and you go,
Oh,
man, I sure would have loved to strangle that person.
yeah, it was very hard emotionally this time in Australia with Krauss. It was difficult.
Is there anybody that you would like to debate? I know that the Dawkins thing was on the table for so long. Is that even of interest? It seems like we don't hear as much about him as we were at the time.
Yeah, it's not for me. I've never sought to debate him. Others have extended invitations, and I've said yes, but he never has. So I don't really care to debate him. I don't think there's anybody out there that I'm hankering to take on, except maybe Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think I would like to have a debate with him, but he again is unwilling.
Yeah, that would be a phenomenal debate to observe, no doubt. What would you say in a cancel culture that we live in to those who fear speaking up as Christians, giving an apologetic, even considering having a platform because they're just worried they're going to be written off or they're going to lose? I just watched last night the new Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma, and it just talks about all the algorithms of social media and how it's influencing, and just the like symbol and what that's done in our youth with, if I don't get enough likes. And what kind of advice would you give to people to speak up, even though there's a risk of being canceled?
I would remind people to look at the example of our Lord Jesus. He was willing to hang naked and dying on a Roman cross, the most shameful and excruciating death in antiquity, out of his love for me. And am I supposed to then be ashamed of standing for him in our culture? Never. If he can go through that sort of humiliation and anguish for me, I'm going to stand for him no matter what.
What a great answer. I mean, think about it. I mean, Jesus talked about, he experienced cancel culture. He was crucified. And what a great reminder for us right there. Dr. Craig, how have you kept your spiritual life? You seem to me as somebody who has remained close to our Lord through the years. And one of the dangers I feel like is early on in a Christian walk, people can be very prayerful, seeking the Lord, but then the more they learn, the more they think, I'll take it from here. I've got this figured out. You seem to have, there's not controversies around your name. You've really lived an upstanding life. I wonder how much of that you attribute to just your relationship with Christ, and what does that look like for you?
Boy, I don't know, Bobby. I tried to maintain a devotional life with prayer and Bible reading every day, and then corporate worship on Sunday, being involved in the local church and using our gifts. I try to cultivate the relationship with my wife, Jan. We have a devotional time every day together and pray with each other. So I think all of these things are really important. But I have no illusions about my own spirituality. I think what has saved me in large measure is the fact I tend to have a pretty isolated life. I'm mainly in my office, and even when I was teaching seminary, if a female student would come into my office, I would always leave the door of the hallway open. I've tried to make a policy never to be alone in a room with a woman with the door closed. And so just taking those kind of safeguards, I think, can help prevent temptation that seems to overtake so many of us.
How has Jan been, a great support to you throughout your ministry. I mean, she's a phenomenal person. Please tell her I said hello as well. I'm just so impressed with her. I'm so impressed with her love for you and her commitment to you.
Yeah.
You married well, Dr. Craig. How has a good marriage helped you to be a great apologist?
Well, she is unique in the sense that she does not sense a separate calling on her life. She could be a stockbroker, Bobby. She could make tons of money in the market if she wanted to. She could be a school teacher. She was trained in that area. She could be in executive administration. But instead, she sees it as her calling to make me as effective as she possibly can. And so she's the wind beneath my wings, so to speak. She sees it as her calling to make Bill Craig as effective as he can possibly be. And that's what she's dedicated herself to doing.
Yeah, it's very evident. And we all love your marriage and how you guys you do life together. And I know that I've had the privilege of traveling with you to South Africa and to Israel, and just getting a chance to meet Dan is a real treat. What's the future of Reasonable Faith? What kind of, you talked about the one project that you're working on, but on a broader scale, what are you hoping to see come to fruition at Reasonable Faith?
At my age, Bobby, I'm now thinking of what legacy I want to leave behind. And so we have just embarked this month on a 2-year project to build a curriculum in Christian philosophy, theology, and apologetics based on my work that would be offered for credit at some Christian university or seminary, a sort of William Craig Center for Christian philosophy, theology, and apologetics. And so over the next 2 years, we hope to develop this center and we hope to place it at some university or seminary where for years to come, this material will be available at the bachelor's level, at the MA level, and then also at just a certificate level for those not interested in a degree program.
Well, that sounds fantastic. How long will this take, you think, before you can get this out?
Well, we're estimating 2 years, and it's going to cost about $120,000 a year for 2 years to develop this center. So that's what we're embarking on right now. And this fall, in our fall matching grant campaign, we'll be trying to raise funds for this. And so it's a huge project, very, very ambitious, but we're optimistic and trusting the Lord that this will happen.
So a couple more questions as we're beginning to descend. If you weren't a Christian, which worldview do you think you would find yourself succumbing to?
Yeah. I think, Bobby, I would probably be a nominal Christian. I couldn't be an atheist or an agnostic. I've never believed that. I've always sensed that there is a creator of the universe, a transcendent cause of the universe. And I certainly wouldn't be a Muslim. I would probably be just one of these very nominal Christians for whom, pardon me, well, almost a deist, but giving some lip service to Christianity, but not really knowing the Lord and taking it seriously, if you know what I mean. I'm hypothesizing based on the trajectory of my life as a teenager before I became a Christian. That was the trajectory I was on, you see, when I finally heard the gospel and everything changed. So I'm just sort of assuming that I would have probably stayed on that trajectory had I not heard the gospel.
Yeah, like when I was in the midst of the dark night of the soul with all these doubts, I'd find myself asking, okay, well, what would it be like to go into this worldview? But I realized to walk out of Christianity into another worldview is just to inherit another set of unforeseen questions. Doubt's not a Christian problem, it's a human problem. In the absence of certainty, there'll always be room for doubt. And so I'm so thankful for our Christian worldview because I best believe it closes that doubt gap. Well,
Yeah,
Dr.
I
Craig,
agree.
I thank you so much for your time with me today on the 1 Minute Apologist. I hope that this will be a special episode for people to listen to. As I wrap up, I guess I would just say you talked about legacy. And for my final question would be, when you think about your legacy, what would be meaningful to you? What does a rich left legacy look like to you, Dr. Craig?
Well, I think it will be my body of published work, my work on arguments for God's existence, my work on the resurrection of Jesus, on Molinism, on the coherence of theism. I have never sought to do what is fashionable or current. I have been trying to write for future centuries. And so that's my hope, that work will endure.
Yeah, well, no doubt it will. I want to bring in Tim Hull to ask if there's any closing announcements as we wrap up. Our executive producer, Tim, anything to say as we're wrapping up here?
No, it was a fantastic conversation. Lots of love for you in the chat, Dr. Craig. So lots of people saying they've been blessed by your ministry. They appreciated your answers. I echo those sentiments as well. I've been from a distance, a student of yours as well. And so that's really all the chat was going on. There's a few questions in there. We can get to those if we have time, but we're kind of running up against our hour here.
Right. Well, Bobby, thank you so much for such a personal conversation. I don't often talk about these things, and I've enjoyed doing it today with you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Craig. That was the goal, to have a personal talk with you, and I thank you for the time today.